Welcome to today's live stream. We're really glad you've chosen to be with us. Just a few things before we get started. If you haven't already, please introduce yourself and let us know where you're tuning in from using the chat window. Now, the chat window is also a great place to interact with others who are on the stream today with you, so feel free to respond to anything that others post just by clicking the reply link underneath their comment. Lastly, we want to make sure that we help you with any questions you have, so you can drop a question in the chat window starting right now. We'll pause a couple of times on the stream to answer any questions that have been asked. So again, thanks for tuning in today, and we'll get started in just a bit.
Welcome to the Future of Work. This is a show where we talk about how forward-thinking organizations use the giant products and the giant tools to really lead the organization into the future. So many organizations right now, they're ran based on business books that were published in the 80s. And things have changed, times have changed. There's innovation that's happened, and innovation is here, but it's not equally distributed. And this is a show where Mike and I get to really talk about what some of the best organizations in the world do differently that really represents the future of work. I'm Bronson, the CEO of Giant, and with me as always is Mike, the president of Giant. Mike, how you doing today, man?
I'm good, Bronson. And I think, in addition to what you said about kind of the history of leadership development, kind of the old, since the 70s, it's kind of been the shtick of like, read a book, go to a seminar, sit in a classroom, listen to a CD, maybe listen to a tape or an audio. But some things have changed in the 21st century. And also there was this little thing called a global pandemic that happened back in March. And the way people work is completely different. I mean, most CEOs I talk to these days are saying that, they don't know if they'll ever go back to a standard office working environment. So what we like to do on the show is talk about how are people surviving and thriving in a 21st century digital world with a global pandemic.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Mike. I love that. So today we're going to get to dive into something really fun, which is the 5-voice team dynamic. And we're going to go through a lot of the details of that. We're going to show you how it plays out. And we're going to show you how you can actually have your own team experience based on that. But before we do, Mike, you want to say a few words about the flywheel in general?
Yeah, I do. So what happens, we found over years and years of working with companies around the globe, we found that organizations are really just a bunch of subcultures. We've said this before, but if you want to actually change the culture or the way an entire organization works, you have to actually start with the individual sub-teams or subcultures inside the organization. So we actually have a tool that shows you that every one of our, basically the organization is just, whether it's organized like this or not, every one of them is just a small flywheel. So you've got a flywheel here over operations and a flywheel over sales. You've got a flywheel over the finance team. Underneath, you have a bunch of different little flywheels. And we found that the average team scores 58% out of 100 when they take the team invincibility score. So what we want to do today is we actually want to dive in and start talking about just this, the tip of the spear, just on communication, because we found that if organizations, if teams, these subcultures, if they can't figure out how to communicate well, they never make it to high performance. It's crazy. These CEOs, again, that we work with around the world, they go, every year when we do our employee engagement survey, our lowest score is around communication. Can you help us communicate better? So I don't know, I've never met a team, I've never met a leader who didn't want better communication. So what we wanted to do today is just give you the tip of the spear for how you can start to communicate at the highest levels.
That's great. So give us a vision for that. Let's say there's an organization with teams and sub-teams. Let's say there's 20 teams altogether. If you were to actually help them increase their communication in those 20 teams, be honest, do you think that would show up on the bottom line? Like, would that actually improve the organization as a whole?
I do, Bronson. It's going to be funny to say this because, we have over 60-something tools in our toolkit, and we've got thousands of resources on Giant, the platform, as people can see on our Ascend and our Invincible app products. But the truth is, I've actually had some of our giant consultants and partners around the world say this: if I could just get the organization to communicate better and more healthily, then I actually think I would see transformation throughout the entire organization. So there's all these different things we can try, right? In leadership and influence, there's no silver bullets, but there are secrets. And one is, if you just improve the communication across the different subcultures, you actually would see a difference on the bottom line.
Yeah, that's great. And to go back to the point I made at the very beginning, if you're watching this right now, you may be thinking, okay, if I were tasked with improving the communication of all my teams, what would I do? I actually want you to think about that for a second. What would you do right now? Ignore Giant. You don't know us. You're on your own. You're in Barnes & Noble, and you got to find a book to help you. Which one do you buy? Is it effective? What do you do? How do you actually improve communication in all your teams? What we're going to show you today, it's almost magic. It is a way to improve communication on your teams and therefore drive the performance of your organization. So what we're going to talk about is the 5-voice team dynamic. So you see the slide up here. We're going to break down every part of this tool. So you may be looking at it and you have no idea what any of this means. Don't worry. We're going to talk through both axes. We're going to talk through the different voices. We're going to talk through how the voices relate to each other. But first, let's start with the word dynamic, Mike. Why do we call this the 5 voices dynamic? What's dynamic about it?
Yeah, and I actually went, Bronson and Grad, I love to look at true definitions of words. We often, listen, wisdom is in the definition of terms. So if we don't have a common language, then we're not talking about the same thing. So we're going to talk through the dynamics of what happens here with the 5 voices. But what I actually looked at the definition, and the second definition of the word dynamics actually says the forces or properties which stimulate growth, development, or change within a system or a process. I'm going to replace that last word. Check this out. The forces or properties which stimulate growth, development, and change within a team. So this tool, and it sounds crazy, right? We take these very complex things and put them into simple visual tools using neurolinguistics to help, cynical know-it-all adults with ADD learn in the 21st century. But the reality is that this one tool could actually be the thing that stimulates growth, development, and change within your team.
Yeah, that's great. So let's start with the axes, right? So let's just start with the vertical axis. So it's the solid gray line from decision-making. And on the bottom, you have systems and logic. And on top, you have people and values. Explain that line to me, because everyone in the organization is either on the top side of that line or on the bottom side of that line. So this is going to teach us about how people are oriented around decision-making. So break that down for us, Mike.
Yeah, and I don't want to give a history lesson on Carl Jung and Myers-Briggs and the hundreds of years of research that's gone into human psychology, but I will tell you this. The source code for the 5 voices is we really simplified something very complex, which is 16 personality types. But so the decision making, and we'll get to processing here in a minute, this actually comes from type dynamics, which happens within the 16 personality types. So the reality is that there's a certain number of people in the world who actually make decisions based on people and values, right? Whether or not you're honoring and valuing people and values and relational harmony, or if you're valuing systems and logic and pragmatic, real things. And so it's really important to think, are you on the top line of that, or are you on the bottom of that? When you go to make a decision, do you use people, values, and relational harmony, or do you use logical clarity and systems to make decisions?
Yeah. Now, just to be clear, let's say we're on the bottom of that and we're about systems and logic. Does that mean we're not nice to people? Does that mean we don't get along with anybody, that we don't like, relationships? Or is it more about just how we make decisions? Break that down for us.
No, Bronson, it literally is how you make decisions. As a matter of fact, it's 50-50. So half of us in the world, naturally, just by nature, like to use systems and logic versus people and values. So it doesn't mean it's not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. The reality is, and we're going to get into this, but you need to consider both when you actually make decisions. So even if your natural tendency is towards systems and logic, you need to consider people and values. And if you're good about putting people and values before profit or getting things done, you also need to consider the systems and logic that go along with decision making. So this reality is that it's a dichotomy. It's like a right and a left hand, Bronson. So if I took your left hand and cut it off, you'd quickly know how important that hand is, right? But you actually have a preference. So this is really just about preference, not about you can't do both. So we all do both, but what's your preference and what's your tendency when making decisions?
Yeah. And would you even say that organizations sometimes tend toward one or the other based on their culture, that they tend to hire more people that fit into the top or the bottom?
I'm positive of that. So again, we've worked with way too many thousands and thousands of organizations around the world. And I can tell you that teams have tendencies based on leadership, and organizations have tendencies based on leadership. We always say that leaders define culture. As a matter of fact, if you're not defining the culture, you're not the leader. There are oftentimes we see a leader in positional power, but they're actually not influencing the culture. Well, they're not the one who's truly leading, right? So the organization or the team will actually take on a tendency based on the leadership. So this morning I was talking to a leader of an engineering company, and we were saying, again, 50-50 across the world, but there are even certain industries that draw different type of decision making. So engineering draws more people who prefer decision making by systems and logic. Nursing and schooling draw or tend to attract people who like to make decisions using people and values. So again, it's 50-50 around the globe in any circumstance, but there are certain industries, certain companies, and certain teams that attract a certain type of decision maker.
Yeah, and so here's what I want the viewers to do right now. First, I want you to think to yourself, where do you fit? Do you fit on the top or the bottom? How do you generally make decisions? Not that you can't use your left hand and do it the other way, but how do you typically make a decision? Is it based on how it's going to make people feel and the values that are authentic to you, or is it on systems and logic and productivity and things like that? Second, I want you to think about where you think your team falls as a whole. Are more people on your team above the line, or more people on your team above or below the line? And then lastly, your entire company. Do you think that most of your company is above or below the line? That right there alone, that little exercise is probably enough to give a few ahas. Oh, that's why in this team I'm loved, and in this other team, they don't get me. That's why the organization as a whole doesn't really jive with my way of decision making, but this one subculture does. Already with just that one axis of decision making, you start realizing kind of where you fall there. So now there's actually another axis, which adds a whole nother layer to the insights here. So that is around processing, which is it present oriented or is it future oriented? What do we mean by that, Mike?
Yeah, and I'm going to answer that here in just a second, Bronson, but I want to actually talk about the insight you just had there. Where do you fit? How about your team, and how about the company? Because I actually want to give you a real example of Giant. So I personally fall below the line. I actually like to make decisions based on system and logic. Our team, we have a lot of people who prefer system and logic on our team as a whole. And so we do that on day in, day out. We have like daily stand-ups, this, Bronson, but we make those decisions. The reality is our organization as a whole, we tend to make decisions above the line. And I can tell you why, for a number of reasons. Number one, our founder and CEO, our founder, Jeremy Kubicek, and chairman, he sits above the line, right? So our founder, the DNA, the ethos of Giant has always been a people first, think about relationships before logic and opportunity. So that's a part of it. But also Giant, we're after changing the entire world and transforming human behavior. And so there's something about that that's very, hey, we want to make sure people come before. We have logic and systems that back it up, but people do. So to your point, Bronson, just that question, even to us as an organization, is like, we have a lot of systems and logic people, but we actually make decisions above the line a lot because of the kind of organization we are. So I think it's really important, even just there, that insight. But let's talk about what your question you asked me, which is, how do people process information? So we've got decision making. Before we make decisions, we have to take in and process information. So in this case, it's not 50-50. 70% of people in the world are actually present-oriented people, or they actually process information based on valuing the past and the present, what is, versus the future. So let's talk about our nurturers and our guardians actually sit on the left side of that line, where when they process information, they want to honor the past and think about what is and what's concrete versus what could be in the future. 30% of people live on the right side of the line, where when they process and take in information, they're future-oriented. It's blue sky, it's theoretical, it's what could be, it's possibilities. That's the way so our connectors, our creative feelers, our creative connectors, our pioneers and our creative pioneers, they actually all live on the right side of the line. So one of the big insights, and again, we're not doing the 5 voices stuff here, but is that nurturers and guardians make up 70+% of the population. So the majority of people live on the left side of the line, where we're present oriented and we want to know what is and what's concrete. And only 30% of people live on the right side of the line, where they're finding out, hey, what's the future look like? What's the possibilities? How can we actually create things that are theoretical and don't quite exist yet?
Yeah. So let's get practical with that. Let's say you're in a meeting and we're talking about the nurturers and the guardians, people on the left side. So they're present oriented. What kinds of questions will they ask? because they're present oriented? What kinds of things do they want to see to make decisions because they're present oriented? What are the things that are going to spark their mind to either not like or like an idea that you're talking about in the team? How are they going to actually process what's at stake there?
Yeah, and we actually have another tool, just a couple down, if you can see on the left side, called Build the Bridge. But as a present-oriented voice, they're going to want to know, has this been done before? Why do we need to change? What's wrong with what we currently have, right? So what happens is when you start to talk about, hey, we're going to move into the future, think about every organization has to have a component of innovation. I remember years ago learning from Jim Collins that you're somewhere on a curve, right? Your organization's either growing or dying. So if you don't continue to innovate and reinvent yourself, you're on that downward curve. So every organization naturally has to innovate and do new things. But the present-oriented folks say, who else has done this before? Is it going to work? Are we all going to be okay? Is it worth investing the resources? These are the kind of things they're thinking and the kind of questions they're asking inside meetings when we're talking about how to innovate to stay relevant in the future.
Absolutely. And I'm actually on the right side of this. So I'm a future-oriented voice. So let me tell you how I process when I'm in a meeting. I'm looking for patterns. I don't need to know who's done it before. I want to see if there's pattern recognition. I want to, I love the quote, skate to where the puck is going, not to where it's been. So I actually don't care if anyone's ever done it before. And I don't care if I have that much concrete data to say it has to work because it already has. I can say, is there a trend line? And I can actually fill in the blanks and see the trend line toward the decision that we're trying to make. And so to me, the concrete data and those kind of case studies are less important, but actually seeing the patterns and the trend lines in the future, as long as I can connect the dots that don't even exist yet, that's important to me. And so is there a natural rub? Is there a natural friction between those two ways of processing information, Mike?
Yeah, no question. I mean, the reality is, again, every one of you that falls on the right side, and most of you guys here would know the voices, or you've taken your assessments, so you're starting to learn more about who you are. And I'd say if you fall on the right side, you're looking at future possibilities, you're looking at theories, you're looking at what is, you're looking for patterns, you're saying, hey, we could probably, I'll never forget this quote, Bronson, from Steve Jobs. He said, my customers will know what they want when I tell them what they want. So he basically was like, I see the future long before everyone else does, and I'm going to go create what I believe they want, even though they're not even asking for it. So you've got a bunch of people on the right side of the line living in a brighter version of the future where they're creating things that never existed. And you've got the majority of us on the left side, 70% plus, who are saying, wait a minute, I can't see that. How did you get there? How did you make that connection or that pattern? Who's done this before, right? So there's a natural tendency for future-oriented voices to see, hey, we could actually do X, Y, and Z. We could actually make this happen. And the rest of the folks going, I literally can't connect. I can't see it. If there's not a bridge, I don't know how to come along the journey with you.
Absolutely. So Mike, I have a question for you here. Joanne asks, if our natural decision-making is based on people and values, would it be more efficient to hire someone that naturally makes decisions from systems and logic? Do you hire for your weaknesses, or do you try to overcome your weaknesses?
No, I think it's actually brilliant. And I would say that we've, play to your strengths. There's all these different ideas here. I can tell you from our experience, it's way better to be aware of your weaknesses and try to work on them, try to curve those edges a little bit, but actually to hire and to fill the things that you're not the best in the world at. Bronson, I don't want to get you started on superpowers because I know you'll go on a rant for a long time, but Joanne, I would say absolutely. If you know you already have a strong gift of making decisions based on people and values, then let's get some people around you who understand systems and logic, and it's more of them playing with their right hand. The best thing you can do on a team is to get people into their sweet spot. The best thing you can do on a leader is see, where are my gaps? And we're going to go here in a minute. Where are the gaps, and how am I going to fill those gaps so that I have a well-rounded team that makes the best decisions and basically processes information the way we need to as a team?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that answer. So right now, I would recommend, if you haven't already, that when this is over, to take the 5-voice assessment, because what's going to happen is you're going to learn the name of what you are. You're going to learn if you're a nurturer or a guardian or one of the other ones. And that's going to be really important, because right now what Mike's going to do, he's going to walk through what quadrant each voice falls into and what that means. Because think about it, just decision-making tells you a lot about yourself. Just processing tells you a lot about yourself. If you know your decision-making and your processing, you now understand yourself in a pretty deep way. So walk through the 5 voices and where they fall in the quadrant, and just briefly what that means for that voice.
Yeah. And I'll just start in the top left and move my way around. I'll start with our nurturers because that we usually start with the nurturers because they're our quietest voice. So basically, again, looking at the quadrant, the matrix, you'll see that nurturers prefer people and values in their decision-making, and they're present-oriented voices. So they fall in that top left quadrant where they're thinking about the concrete, what's happened in the past, what's practical, and they're making their decisions based on people and values. We always say the nurturers always put people before profit. That's a really important value of the nurturers. So that's there. Moving over to my right, we've got still people and values for decision making, but we're now future oriented in the way we process. We've got our connectors over there who are thinking about the future, but also looking at possibilities for people. And you've got our creative connectors who are, again, they're creative, but this is the one dichotomy we have where they're actually above the line, where they prefer to have peoples and values be a part of their decision making versus the systems and logic. If we come down, again, we're still on the future-oriented side, but we're coming down to systems and logic. We've got our pioneers. So again, strategic vision of the future. How do we take that hill? Always, Bronson just talked about it. I'm looking for patterns for how we can win. I don't care if it's been done before. That's our pioneers. And then our creative pioneers are even further out. They're looking 5 to 10 years out, but they do it from I'm looking for patterns and systems, but I actually want to create the systems that people can exist in into the future. So our creative pioneers are using systems and logic to make decisions. They're not like the creative connectors who are looking for how do we create possibilities for people and have it be around the relational harmony. And then finally, as I move to the left, we're now in, processing is present oriented, but we're down in the systems and logic. So our guardians, they love concrete, they love the past, they love to honor what is, they love to see where all the resources are and have all the data, but then they want to make decisions based on the systems and logic of all the information that they have.
Yeah, that's great, Mike. I mean, my guess is this probably resonates with people because I know when I look at Pioneer in the bottom right, I'm like, yeah, that's how I make decisions and that's how I process information and that's the quadrant I live in. And so, of course, I'm going to get along with creative pioneers pretty well because they also see things the way I do and they make decisions the way I do. But now here's where a new insight comes in. What about the people that are not in my quadrant? What about the people that are actually the exact opposite quadrant of me? So what if they actually process information completely different and make decisions completely different? What do we call that when they are in the exact opposite situation of ourselves?
Yeah, we actually call it the Nemesis voice. Now, I don't want people to overthink that. Nemesis does not mean your enemy in this case. Nemesis voice means it is the voice that's the most difficult for you to value and appreciate and the one that's most difficult for you to access. So whenever you take your 5 voices assessment, again, if you take it in the shoes off, approach where you actually take it, this is truly who I am and you get to your true type, you're going to find that you've got a 5 voice order. Your Nemesis voice is simply the one that falls 5th, right? So for myself, for example, I'm a guardian pioneer and my Nemesis voice, if you look up to the right, is actually the creative connector. All the way the furthest thing over to the right and the connector, but the creative connector is specifically the one that's the Nemesis. So again, don't think of it in terms of your enemy. Think of it like this. As a guardian pioneer, I want to know what exists, what are we going to do, what's the strategy, what's the bottom line, what's the result, how are we going to get there? I want to know those things. The creative connector is thinking 5 to 10 years out about what are the decisions that we're doing today? How are those going to impact people into the future? What if we built something that doesn't quite exist that would actually be a better environment for people to exist in? And I'm like, I cannot easily access information 5 to 10 years out because I'm thinking about what's my 10,000 item checklist that has to get done today. So again, Bronson, it's not about enemies. It's about what's the thing that's most difficult for me to access and then again, value and appreciate. So we're learning how do we take someone that's literally the exact opposite from us. They process information and make decisions completely differently from us. How do we understand and value and appreciate them and see the need for their voice to, again, round out what we do?
Yeah. So what does it feel like in a typical team, right? You go in, you're consulting with them. They're just a normal average team. What is their experience dealing with their Nemesis voices? Before you come there, before you show them this or expose the voices and how they're actually Nemesis voices, how do they view the other people that are in their Nemesis voice category?
Yeah, and I think that's why we love to give people the language, the common language of the 5 voices, because I think typically, again, this is not everyone, but typically you'll find that somebody sees their Nemesis voice as a wet blanket. They see them as somebody who I don't understand them. Like I'm in the meeting and I'm trying to figure out, things that are very logical and simple, and they're talking about all these ideas that make no sense to me. Or, hey, I'm trying to live 5 to 10 years out, and this person's myopically thinking about something that happened yesterday that doesn't really matter. So you find, Bronson, that they have these unnecessary rubs, and they don't understand that it simply is the natural way they're wired. As a matter of fact, we'll typically think of people as like, that person is my enemy. So before we give them the language of the voices, and that's why we have to be careful with that word nemesis, they might think of, hey, that person's my adversary. Like when we're in meetings, they always disagree with me. They never like my ideas. They never seem to fully understand me. So again, without having a common language of it's just a natural tendency, they actually could think of each other very adversarially.
Yeah, and I've personally been in those situations. Before I had this language, I felt like, why are they so different? And here's what's another part of the problem is we feel that by default, we're correct. Whatever quadrant you're in, you probably think that's the right quadrant to be in. I wish more people, I could drag them into that quadrant, but that's actually not good. We don't want more people in our quadrant. We want to learn how to work with people from every quadrant because they're bringing something to the team and bringing something to the organization that you can't actually access easily. They're bringing something that if they weren't there, it wouldn't exist. If everyone was in your quadrant, there's going to be major gaps on your team. So talk to me about this. What are some strategies for working with your Nemesis voice? Because I love what you said. They feel like a wet blanket. That is what we feel no matter what the Nemesis is. So what are some strategies to move from wet blanket to valued team member?
Yeah, that's really good. And you mentioned something, Bronson, I want to highlight, which is if everyone lived in the same quadrant as you ever hear this? Like if two of you in a marriage are the exact same, one of you is redundant. So in the same idea, if you had 5 people that lived in the same quadrant, then some of you guys are redundant. You already have those skills. You already have that expertise. What you need is your blind spots and the things that you don't know, which moves me to your question. The best thing you can do is start to truly like learn and understand. We actually have in our 5 Voices Insights for one of the Nemesis voices, it says, find your Nemesis voice and actually have them mentor you and how they see the world. So I'm kidding. Like, so again, my Nemesis voice is actually the creative connector. So I've gotten to know creative connectors who I love dearly now because I see they see the world so differently than me. So one of my mentors says, you should be with people, you should have curiosity, not judgment. So the idea is start from a place of curiosity and say, how can I learn more about how this person sees the world? And as you do, you start to realize, man, they actually, not only do they see the world very differently from you, but there's some very important things that they do in their decision-making, in their processing that I actually could learn. So they start to almost show you some of the blind spots in the way that you make decisions, in the way that you process information, in the way that you handle relationships with people, in the way you make decisions with systems and logic. They actually start to show you what's valuable that you might be missing in the way that you approach the world.
Yeah, no, that's so good. One of the things I recommend doing is when you have a Nemesis voice, go and actually watch the videos on our platform about that voice just to learn how they're seeing the world. So I actually did this. I was on a road trip just recently, short, quick personal story about my wife. She's a nurturer. I'm a pioneer. We're Nemesis, right? So I'm married to a Nemesis, but we get along great. But there's differences in how we view the world. So she wanted to take an extra hour on the road trip to go a new route through Kansas, which who needs a new route through Kansas, right? That's my thinking. I'm systems and logic. I'm about, the future. I want to get to where I'm going and so I can like do the work that's there for me. And she wants to take an extra hour because she's in the moment and she's thinking about showing her kids a new experience. So she's doing what nurturers do. So I'm like, I don't understand why we would do this. So I went back and started like re-watching her videos and relearning like this is a different way to see the world and it's not wrong. Everything's not about decisions and logic and everything isn't about the future. Sometimes now matters and sometimes people matter and it isn't always about this quadrant winning or that quadrant winning. You have to be flexible and on a team, it's more than one person. It's more than 2 people. It's lots of people. So that dynamic is going to become very complicated if you don't have the humility to say, you know what, that other person is bringing something and it matters what they're bringing, even if I don't have the ability to access it naturally. So I love what you said around those strategies to do that. Do you think that the best teams try to have people in every quadrant, or is it okay if you're lopsided? Be honest. What do you think about that?
Yeah. So we get this question all the time. Once people see the voices and they see the power of the voices and the communication, they say, well, then I need to go out and hire one of every of the voices. If you can, great. I would definitely say go for it. If you have the freedom and the resources to be able to go and do that, I'd say absolutely go and do that. And maybe if you see a massive gap in the way that you operate as a team, then go and maybe look for a voice like that to go and hire and fill that gap. But I would say this, it's more important that you learn to value and appreciate what each brings to the table and that you consider it in your processing and in your decision-making. So let me give you an example. Years ago at Giant, our senior leadership team had no nurturers on the team. So we had a pioneer, we had, connector, a guardian, and creative. But we had no nurturer. So what we would do is two things. Number one, we would consider what would the nurturer, how would they process the information that we're talking about here, and how would they make decisions that would talk about practical help for people, this peoples and values. So we would consider what they would think before we'd make decisions. So it's not like, oh, we have to actually have a nurturer in the meeting making the decision. That's great. But we said, let's at least think, how are the people going to be impacted? Because that's what they're going to care about most. What's their experience going to be like? Secondarily, on big decisions, we would go find a nurturer advisor. So maybe it wasn't someone in the team making the decision, but we give them enough information to say, here's what we're about to do. Here's the conversation. Here's the decision we made. Here's where we're about to go and enact. Nurturer, give us your feedback on how that's going to feel to people. And then they would give us very valuable insights. So I would say, Bronson, it's not about hiring every single one. If you can, great. It's more about understanding what each brings to the table so that you can actually understand, what are we missing and how do we need to consider that as we continue to operate.
Yeah, no, that's great, Mike. And then we have Matt Griffey here. He says, have a nurturing voice as an office manager to help me better understand the people around me. You can really lean on the people that see things differently, can't you?
Yeah. I mean, Matt said he's a pioneer. So he's brilliant. He's like, hey, I've got a nurturer, my Nemesis Voice, right? Someone who sees the world very differently than me. And they're helping me because, again, as a leader, what you want is you want people around you have superpowers in things you're not the best in the world at. So I would say absolutely as a leader, you do want to look to hire people who are different from you, not just people who are going to be yes men or yes women who are going to do everything you say because you always agree.
Absolutely. And even right now in Giant, we're working through how to do something with one of our products. And so one of our strategies, we said, let's get one person of every voice to run this by and to get their feedback. It has been so instrumental because the conversations I have with a nurturer about that strategic decision are so different than the conversations I had with a guardian about that strategic decision. And what they each add, the other person couldn't. They don't access it as easily. It's not what they care about. It's not what they're going to bring up during the conversation. So by talking to each voice about an important decision, I feel more confident that we as an exec team are moving in the right direction, because if all 5 voices can't rip a hole in it, it's probably pretty good. If a couple voices can rip a hole in it, then strategically it's probably the wrong direction, and we got to rethink it. So it gives us a lot of confidence when you pull in the voices. When you do things without the voices, you're probably overlooking something. You won't know what it is because you don't access that information easily, but you're probably overlooking something, and you won't ever know what it is if you don't pull those voices in. So Mike, people watching this, I'm sure they had a lot of ahas about themselves. They were saying, wow, that's my quadrant. That's where I live. That's how I process information. That's how I make decisions. They're probably wondering, I wonder if Joe is in this other quadrant. I wonder if Maria is down here. I wonder if Susie's over there. They're probably starting to wonder how the team dynamics that they have to live with every day actually are in reality. So we actually have something we want to talk about here, which is a free team analysis. This is something we're starting to do this week, where we want them to actually learn where their team is on that, plotted on that graph. So talk to us for a second, Mike, about what the free team analysis would look like. They would start by taking their 5 voices, right?
Right. So the first thing you got to do, and to your point, Bronson, is you've got to actually get in platform on system, right? Go to Ascend and actually have them take the voices assessment. That's the first thing you got to do, because you need folks to understand where they fall and start to understand and learn about themselves. Remember, I know folks, you guys have taken different things in the past, like DISC and PI and all these different things, whatever psychometric. But the reality is there's nothing that's going to show you the dynamics, the way these different voices play with each other, and all the value that Bronson talked about in terms of decision-making and processing. How can you actually see the dynamics and the Nemesis voices that lie there within? So the first thing you do is take the 5 voices assessment. Then you can start your invincible trial, as you know, Bronson. And then we want you to do is let's have this conversation around what are the dynamics of the team. So the first thing that happens is you actually take the 5 voices assessment and you start to see what connects with you about your voice and why. So again, I love Matt a minute ago. He goes, hey, I'm a pioneer. I know I've got to get some nurturers around me because I got a really strong voice. You start to have these understandings, these ahas. I know, Bronson, many folks take the assessment for the first time and they go, oh my goodness, how did you know all that about me? Right? They see the insights and they don't realize that human nature is ridiculously predictable. So the first thing you got to do is look at, okay, what are the insights about your voice and why? Second thing is we actually want to get together with the team and have a discussion. So seeing the different voices on the team, what ahas or insights do you have? Oh, we noticed that we've got 3 creatives and a connector. So we're missing 3 of the voices, right? So what are those insights and key things that you see? Wow, sometimes teams are all above the line or below the line. We all make decisions based on people values. We have no systems and logic people making decisions, right? So you start to see, based on that dynamic, what are those insights based on, the volumes of the voices, what you're lacking, what your strengths are. Then next, you're going to look at what are the dynamics of the team and what ahas and insights do you have. So to Bronson's point, and I'm going to scroll down here on the sheet second, but basically down to the dynamics, we start to look at, okay, wow, we have a lot of people on the team who actually have Nemesis voices. So I'll never forget being in the barracks at a general contractor construction site, actually down here in Naples, Florida. And I had the room, they did their voices and they had them like separate in the room, and they had half of the room were creative voices. And all of a sudden it was like mind blowing, because I told the leader, who happened to be a creative himself, pioneer creative, I said, do you realize that this is an unnatural distribution of voices? Like creatives only make up, a little more than 10% of people in the world. How in the world do you have half of your team as creatives? Well, this leader, he had hired or brought onto the project a ton of people who had the creative voice. So immediately we saw these folks are going to be future oriented. They're going to look, it's going to be difficult for them to communicate. You had a couple of nurturers on the team, and they were saying, we can never get, like, what do we have to do today to get our job done? So immediately we were able to show the creative pioneers, who would be more Nemesis voices for those nurturers. We were able to see very quickly, there's going to be a big rub. All of the leadership sat over here in the future, and all the people who had to make the donuts every day didn't know what to do because they couldn't get the directions for what to do today out of the leadership. So you're going to get some powerful insights about these different dynamics that we talked about before.
That's great.
Yeah. And then finally, the last thing is we want to talk about, okay, if let's say we're just now scratching the surface of communication, right? We talked about it in the beginning, but communication is only the very beginning of that healthy flywheel. You still have to get relationships, alignment, execution, and capacity to the highest scores in order to become a high-performing, resilient team that you could call invincible. So we're talking about communication at a deep level here and using this really important psychometric to show you that. But if you don't start to get that right, that one thing, communication, you really can't start the rest of your journey on the flywheel. It's almost like a do not pass go.
Yeah. So here's what I want you to imagine if you're watching this. I want you to imagine that you were able to see all the voices on your team and how they're distributed. So that's the first thing. So imagine being able to see what quadrant they're in. And then on top of that, imagine having a call with one of our experts that can actually walk you through what that means. So you're not left alone to your own devices to figure it out. They're actually going to say, okay, here's what that means. And this is what we're calling a free team analysis. We feel like this is such powerful information and can help unlock so many people that we just want to give it away for free. We want to give away the assessment for free. And we also want to give away the actual team experience of having one of our experts walk you through what this means for free using our product. So if you want to take advantage of this free team analysis, there's two ways you can do it. Next week, we're going to have a button at the top of the Ascend product. So if you're in Ascend and you look at the top of the product, there's going to be a button that says free team analysis. So if you currently see that button, click there and it'll tell you exactly what to do and how to get this free team analysis. If that button is not there right now, then you can actually just email hello@giant.tv. And if you send an email to hello@giant.tv and you just put in the subject line free team analysis, then we'll actually connect you with an expert and help you get that process started. It's actually a really simple process. Like Mike said, you're going to start by just taking the 5-voice assessment for yourself. You're going to add your team members and they're going to take the 5-voice assessment. And then you really just set up a time to get with an expert. It's just that simple. But when the expert shows up on the call, they're going to be able to show your people and actually where they are on the quadrant. So Mike, we have another question here from Matt Grippy. He says, it was so helpful to have our whole team do the assessment. With this, I was able to better understand each member and help better understand how to talk with them and give them a chance to grow. So helpful. Yeah, I mean, as a leader, how insightful is it to have this information, Mike?
It's so powerful. One of the guys on our team, many of the folks on the platform will know Hunter Hodge, but Hunter and I are actually Nemesis voices. And so I can't tell you when we started, obviously as the organization, building the 5 voices and starting to test it all over the world, getting to know that like Hunter and I love each other. Like he's just such a fantastic guy, but we see the world completely differently. So for me, the insight as his leader to be able to figure out what does Hunter need to actually grow, to develop, grow, and thrive at the highest levels, I need to fully understand how he sees the world and support him in his bent. So I think one of the biggest insights for me as a leader, Bronson, is learning what are people's bent, how do they like to see the world, how do they like to make decisions, And how can I support them to be liberated and feel free to do that? Versus oftentimes as leaders, this is the way we do things because this is the way I do it. And people feel like, well, that's not the way I do it. So I'm gonna adhere to that. Out of respect, I'm gonna do that. But you're making me play with my left hand a lot. So the way that we actually get the best out of people, the way we unlock their potential is we understand who they are and we start to lead them in their bent.
Yeah, that's great. We actually have another question from Joanne here. She asked, when you make decisions and you want to get the perspectives of all voices, would it be more efficient to bring all 5 voices in the room or speak to each individually first? If you want, Mike, I'll tackle this one because I'm actually going through this process. And we actually talked through how should we do it just 2 weeks ago. And we ended up landing on talking to them individually. And the reason we went that direction, you could talk to them as a group. That wouldn't be bad, and really good things would come out of it. So if that's what you need to be efficient, that's fine. We decided to go to them individually, one, to really hear that voice. I didn't want the nurture voice clouded by the pioneer and their strong voice in the same room. I wanted to really hear the nurture. I didn't want to hear, I didn't want the creative being, overran by the guardian who just wants to figure out exactly how's it going to work. I wanted to hear the real creativity, So I got with each voice individually because I felt like that was the way to really hear that voice without any noise around it. And then I could go back and process and kind of figure it out. Do you agree with that, Mike? Do you think there's a reason to do both sometimes?
No, I think you said it perfectly. If you have the time, it's best to get their perspective in a one-on-one environment. We all feel, guys, in a one-on-one, it's like, hey, I'm coming to you. I'm trying to pull knowledge and expertise from you. I value and appreciate your opinion. When it's one-to-one, there's just an extra level of freedom and transparency that comes from that. Now, we say the rules of engagement is another tool you'll learn with the 5 voices. When you get into the system and you start using Invincible, you'll learn the rules of engagement, which is let the nurturers go first, let the pioneers go last. And that stuff's powerful when you have a team meeting. And we highly recommend you use it. But I would say if you have a really important decision to make, let everyone play their best with their right hand in a one-on-one situation, and then maybe bring the group together off the back if you have the time to do that.
Yeah, that's good. Well, Mike, this has been, actually another question here. I was going to wrap it up, but not yet. Dan Fry says, 2020 has been the year of the systems and logic voices being forced to lead through people and values topics. I've seen many struggle. That's a really interesting insight that trends can cause us to have to see the world in a different way. So even though we've created this moat so that everything is done the way that's natural to us, sometimes a year like 2020 comes along and we have to learn how to shift gears. Isn't that right, Mike?
Absolutely, guys. And that's why leadership is not for the weary. Leaders, our job is to continue to navigate the storm, navigate the waters, navigate what's happening next. And so anything, Bronson, I tell you today is relevant today, right? It doesn't mean that none of it will be relevant, but 6 months from now, we might have a different landscape. And so I love Dan's comment. You have to think about, hey, if I actually struggle to see the world through peoples and values and actually lead through influence in that way, then I would highly recommend you find a coach. As a matter of fact, I know Dan Fry specifically, he actually is a brilliant coach to people who need to see the world in a different way. So I think it's really important, Bronson, that we see what are our blind spots and weaknesses, and how do we continue to invest and pour into being coached and leveled up in those areas where we can't be the best in the world because we have these natural gifts and talents, and we want to stay in that lane and leverage what we've got.
No, it's so good. Well, I hope people watching this, they got a lot of value just in this live stream, seeing how the voices are different, seeing why they may be nemesis, but they're not enemies. They just see the world differently, seeing how we really want to value each of the voices, and that it's really going to help us be a team member or a team leader the more we understand this. And just to highlight it again, we want to give you this free team analysis. We actually think it's so powerful and so breakthrough, and it's free. So there's just no reason, if you're watching this, that you shouldn't take advantage of it. So look for that call to action on the top of Ascend where it says, free team analysis. If you don't see that, email us hello@giant.tv and let us take you through this assessment, and then also do your free team analysis with an expert so that you can help unlock the people on your team. If you felt this was cathartic and you felt like there was something good from this and you got some ahas, now imagine if every single person on your team has that same experience of, oh, now I can actually be a more productive team member. Now I can actually love the people around me deeper and better based on how they see the world, not the way that I see the world. If you do that for your team, you're doing something very important for them. So we really do hope you take us up on the free team analysis. It's a new offering that we hope can really just unlock people even before they know a whole lot about Giant or what we're all about. So Mike, this has been awesome. Thank you, Mike, for letting me just pick your brain. I mean, you've consulted with I don't know how many companies. When you hear Mike talk about these things, it is not his opinion. He's a guardian. He doesn't deal in opinion. He's telling you what he's seen in the field day in and day out for years. So to be able to pull from Mike is just such a treat on this call. And I think we're going to do this format quite a bit. I think we're going to just pull from Mike a lot because he's seen so much in the real world about how these tools actually work. So Mike, thank you so much for being with me again today. Yeah,
I had a blast. And guys, thanks for tuning in. To Bronson's point, please take advantage of the free team experience. There's no bait and switch. It literally is just an investment in you and your team. If it's valuable, you guys will continue to go on your journey, and that's awesome. But we just thank you guys for leaning in. Thank you for taking the time to tune in today and come back and see us next Thursday.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. See you later.
Yeah.